What happens when the most powerful Alpha King is brought to his knees by 5 ruthless rivals in a crowded medieval tavern? He isn't saved by his elite royal guard. He is saved by the trembling Omega waitress pouring his wine, harboring a lethal secret that defied werewolf history. The Obsidian Stag was not a tavern for the weak, nor was it a place for cheap ale and common brawls. Nestled in the neutral territory of the Valerius Valley, it was a high-end, heavily fortified establishment, favoured by the most dangerous apex predators of the medieval realm. Its walls were reinforced with ironwood, and its chandeliers dripped with melted beeswax and wealth. Genevieve kept her head bowed, her hand steady, as she balanced a heavy silver tray laden with roasted meats and crystal decanters of spiced wine. As an Omega, her survival depended entirely on her ability to blend into the shadows, to be seen only as an instrument of service, and never as a threat. In a world ruled by fangs, territorial dominance, and the suffocating pressure of alpha auras, an Omega without a pack was usually dead or enslaved. Genevieve was neither, entirely by design. Tonight, the air inside the stag was thick enough to choke on. The ambient scent of roasted venison and rosemary was completely overpowered by the sharp, metallic tang of dominance and barely suppressed violence. Seated at the grand circular table in the center of the private dining hall was Leander Blackwood, the Alpha King of the unified Northern Territories. Leander was a terrifyingly handsome man, built like a fortress of muscle and scars, with eyes the color of a winter storm. He wore a dark velvet tunic laced with silver thread, casual, yet radiating an authority that made the wooden floorboards groan under his invisible weight. He had come to negotiate the final terms of the Vanderbilt Accords, a peace treaty designed to end a century of border wars over the rich silver mines in the Western Mountains. But Genevieve, whose senses were far sharper than anyone in the room realized, knew there would be no peace tonight. Seated around Leander were 5 rival alphas, men who had formerly bent the knee, but whose hearts pumped nothing but venom. There was Bastion of the Northern Crags, a brute with a face mapped in claw marks, Dominic of the Red River, sleek and treacherous, Thorn of the Ironweald, whose eyes darted constantly, Kalen of the Ashbone faction, reeking of arrogance, and Roderick of the Sunken Valleys, a massive wolf who tapped his heavily jeweled fingers against the oak table. "You ask too much, Leander," Dominic purred, swirling the dark red wine in his goblet. It was a rare vintage, imported from the human Bordeaux region, a luxurious touch to mask the bitterness of the meeting. The silver mines belong to the earth. To claim a 70% tithe for the crown is greed. "It is tax for the protection my armies provide your borders," Leander replied, his voice a low, rumbling baritone that sent a shiver of pure, instinctual obedience down the spines of the tavern staff. "Unless you prefer the feral rogues of the wasteland tearing through your villages again, Dominic." Genevieve approached the table, her steps completely silent. She poured more wine into Kalen's glass, keeping her eyes fixed on the linen tablecloth. As she leaned in, her highly trained olfactory senses picked up a faint, almost imperceptible scent beneath the heavy Bordeaux wine. White oleander, crushed nightshade, and liquid silver ash. Her heart skipped a single beat, but her face remained a mask of placid submission. Liquid silver ash was an ancient, highly illegal alchemical poison. It didn't kill an alpha, it paralyzed their wolf spirit, severing the connection between their human mind and their healing factor. She stepped back, sliding into the shadows near the roaring hearth. She watched as Leander raised his goblet. "To the Accords," Leander declared, his gaze sweeping over the 5 men. "To the Accords," the 5 rivals echoed. But only Leander drank deeply. The others barely let the liquid touch their lips. It happened with terrifying speed. Leander placed his goblet down, but his hand missed the base of the table by a fraction of an inch. The crystal shattered on the floor. The Alpha King blinked, his storm-grey eyes suddenly losing their sharp focus. A low, ragged growl tore from his throat as he gripped the edge of the table, the wood splintering beneath his iron grip. "What is this?" Leander snarled, trying to rise to his feet. His knees buckled, his massive frame swayed, the veins in his neck bulging black as the poison attacked his nervous system. Outside the heavy oak doors, the sound of muffled shouts and the sickening crunch of bone echoed through the corridor. The king's elite guards were being slaughtered. Bastian was the first to move. The hulking Alpha kicked his chair back and drew a serrated hunting knife from his boot. "It is the end of a tyrant," Bastian spat, his eyes flashing a vibrant, murderous gold. The remaining 4 Alphas rose in unison, their auras exploding outward in a suffocating wave of dominance. The remaining tavern staff, waiters, musicians, and kitchen boys fell to their knees, weeping and gasping for air as the predatory pressure crushed their lungs. Even the tavern owner bolted out the back door, abandoning his establishment to the bloodbath. Leander roared, fighting through the paralysis. He lunged across the table, his claws extending, and managed to backhand Thorn with enough force to shatter the Alpha's jaw. Thorn went flying across the room, crashing into a stack of ale barrels. But the effort cost Leander everything. He collapsed onto the floor, coughing up blood that hissed and smoked with silver toxicity. Dominic unsheathed a magnificent broadsword, stepping over the shattered glass toward the fallen king. "Hold him down," Dominic commanded. Calen and Roderick shifted partially, their hands transforming into massive, furred paws with razor-sharp claws. They pinned Leander's broad shoulders to the floorboards. "Any last decrees, Your Majesty?" Dominic mocked, raising the broadsword. "I hear the crown is heavy. Let me take it off your shoulders, permanently." From the shadows of the hearth, Genevieve watched. Her Omega instincts screamed at her to drop to the floor, to bare her neck in submission, to cry and beg for mercy like the rest of the surviving staff huddled in the corners. But Genevieve was not a normal Omega. She was the last living descendant of the Silver Shadows, a legendary, forgotten bloodline of Omegas, bred not for submission, but for absolute, terrifying neutralization of rogue Alphas. She let out a slow, measured breath. It was time to work. To the wolves in the room, Omegas were nothing but soft flesh and submissive pheromones. They were the peacemakers, the breeders, the weak. So when Genevieve unpinned the white linen apron from her waist and let it fall to the floor, none of the 5 Alphas even looked in her direction. They were entirely focused on the kill, drunk on the scent of the king's blood and the imminent shift of power. Genevieve closed her eyes and engaged a biological mechanism that had been dormant in her bloodline for 300 years. The void scent. Instantly, her natural sweet scent of lavender and honey vanished. Her heartbeat slowed to a glacial crawl. Her body temperature dropped, and the soft, trembling aura of an Omega was violently sucked inward, leaving an absolute, terrifying vacuum in the room. Dominic paused, the broad sword hovering above Leander's neck. He frowned, his wolf senses suddenly disoriented by the abrupt absence of life in the corner of the room. It felt like stepping off a ledge in the dark. "What the—" He never finished the sentence. Genevieve moved. She didn't run. She glided with a predatory fluidity that broke the laws of physics. In her hands, she held 2 solid silver meat-carving spikes she had slipped from the roast pig on her tray. Before Calen could even turn his head, Genevieve was behind him. She didn't try to pierce his skull or his heart. Alpha bones were too thick, their muscles too dense. Instead, she drove the silver spike directly into the base of his neck, expertly severing the C1 vertebra and piercing the spinal cord. Calen didn't even scream. His massive, wolf-shifted body instantly went completely slack, and he collapsed onto the floor, utterly paralyzed from the neck down, his golden eyes wide with uncomprehending horror. Roderick, still pinning Leander's other arm, let out a deafening roar and lunged at the diminutive waitress. "You filthy little bitch!" he bellowed, his jaws snapping toward her face. Genevieve didn't retreat. She ducked under his massive arm, her movements as sharp and precise as shattered glass. As Roderick's momentum carried him forward, she reached out and pressed 3 fingers against the brachial plexus nerve cluster under his armpit, channeling a violent burst of her suppressed kinetic energy directly into his nervous system. It was a technique known to her ancestors as the aura crush. Roderick howled in agony as his own alpha aura was forcefully inverted. The biological shockwave short-circuited his heart. He crashed into the heavy oak table, foaming at the mouth, his body locked in a violent seizure. 2 down in less than 4 seconds. Dominic and Bastian froze. The remaining tavern staff stopped whimpering, staring in absolute, stunned silence. Even Leander, bleeding and gasping for air on the floor, forced his heavy eyelids open to witness the impossible. A tiny Omega, standing barely 5'2", had just neutralized 2 warlords without breaking a sweat. "Kill her!" Dominic shrieked, his refined composure shattering into pure panic. Bastian, recovered from his initial shock, charged. He fully shifted, tearing out of his clothes to become a monstrous 9-foot-tall grey wolf. He barreled toward Genevieve, his jaws wide open to snap her in half. Genevieve remained motionless. She waited until the massive beast was inches away, the stench of his hot, rotting breath blowing her hair back. At the very last millisecond, she dropped into a slide beneath his leaping form. As she slid under the beast's belly, she snatched a fallen, jagged shard of crystal glass from Leander's shattered goblet. With surgical precision, she slashed upward, slicing clean through the deep femoral artery and the hamstring of Bastian's left hind leg. The silver-laced poison that had been on the glass instantly entered his bloodstream. The giant wolf crashed into the far wall with a pathetic yelp, his leg entirely useless, the silver rapidly burning through his veins and preventing his healing factor from kicking in. He thrashed weakly, reduced to a whimpering heap of fur. Genevieve stood up, elegantly brushing the dust from her modest woolen skirt. She turned her cold, emotionless eyes toward Dominic. Dominic was trembling. The Alpha of the Red River, a man who commanded armies, was shaking violently. He gripped his broadsword with both hands, pointing it at her. What are you?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "You have no scent. You're an Omega. You should be cowering." "I am a waitress," Genevieve said, her voice soft, melodic, yet carrying a chilling resonance that echoed off the stone walls. "And you are making a mess of my dining room." Dominic roared, a desperate, fearful sound, and swung the heavy silver broadsword in a wide arc aimed at her torso. Genevieve didn't dodge. She stepped inside the arc of the blade. Moving faster than the eye could track, she caught Dominic's wrists. Her delicate pale fingers clamped down on the pressure points of his forearms with the crushing force of a hydraulic press. Dominic gasped as his fingers involuntarily opened, dropping the heavy sword. Before it even hit the ground, Genevieve drove the heel of her palm upward, striking Dominic directly under his chin. The impact snapped his jaws shut with a sickening crack, shattering his teeth and sending a concussive shockwave straight into his brain. Dominic's eyes rolled back, and he crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. Silence fell over the obsidian stag. The only sound was the crackling of the hearth fire and the ragged, shallow breathing of the Alpha King. Genevieve calmly walked over to the unconscious Dominic, stepping lightly over his armored body. She picked up a clean linen napkin from a nearby table, meticulously wiped the blood from her hands, and then turned her attention to Leander. The Alpha King was struggling to keep his eyes open. The silver ash was shutting down his organs. He looked up at the timid waitress who had poured his wine only 10 minutes ago. She looked entirely unbothered, her posture perfect, her expression serene. She knelt beside him, her small, cool hands pressing against his burning chest. "Who?" Leander rasped, coughing up another speck of silver blood. "Are you?" "Hush, Your Majesty," Genevieve whispered, her eyes glowing with a faint, ethereal silver light that no Omega should ever possess. "If you speak, the poison spreads faster. Let me heal you, and then you and I are going to have a very long conversation about my tip." Genevieve's hands, pale and surprisingly delicate, pressed flat against Leander's armored chest. The Alpha King was a titan of muscle and scarred flesh, a warrior who had conquered the frozen tundras of the north, yet right now he was entirely at the mercy of a woman who legally had fewer rights than his hunting hounds. "Do not move," Genevieve ordered. Her voice had lost the subservient lilt of a tavern waitress. It was now sharp, authoritative, and terrifyingly calm. Leander gritted his teeth as a strange, freezing sensation radiated from her palms. Traditional Omega healers used warm, soothing energy to accelerate a wolf's natural cellular regeneration. Genevieve was doing the exact opposite. She was using her void biology to create a metaphysical vacuum, forcefully drawing the liquid silver ash poison out of his bloodstream and into her own. Black, corrosive veins began to travel up Genevieve's forearms. She didn't flinch. Her breathing remained steady, a masterclass in pain tolerance that left Leander absolutely staggered. "You are absorbing it," Leander rasped, his storm-grey eyes wide with disbelief. "It will kill you." "I am a descendant of the Silver Shadows, Your Majesty," Genevieve replied coldly, her eyes fixed on his chest. "My liver processes toxins that would melt a normal wolf's internal organs. Keep your heart rate down. You are making this difficult." Within agonizing minutes, the suffocating paralysis gripping Leander's spine began to recede. The king dragged in a ragged breath, the sheer power of his alpha aura flickering back to life like a rekindled forge. He sat up, grabbing Genevieve's wrist before she could pull away. "Why did you save me?" he demanded, his grip firm but careful not to bruise her. "You could have let them kill me and vanished. An Omega with your skills owes no loyalty to the crown." Genevieve yanked her hand free, gracefully rising to her feet. "I do not care about your crown, Leander. I care about who funded this assassination." She gestured toward the unconscious bodies of the 5 rival alphas. "These fools are merely blunt instruments, warlords with big egos and small minds. They do not have the wealth to acquire refined liquid silver ash, nor the intellect to bypass your royal intelligence network." Leander frowned, slowly pushing himself up from the blood-stained floorboards. His muscles ached, but his deadly speed was returning. "Then who orchestrated this?" "The House of Rothschild," Genevieve stated flatly, dropping a bombshell that made the temperature in the room plummet. Leander froze. The Rothschild Silver Bank was not a myth. It was a very real, incredibly private and ruthless financial syndicate that operated in the human territories bordering the Wolf Realms. They funded wars, controlled the continent's debt, and possessed private mercenary armies that rivaled royal legions. For decades, they had been trying to monopolize the supernatural world's resources. "The Rothschilds," Leander murmured, his eyes darkening with sudden, violent realization. "The Vanderbilt Accords. I refuse to allow private human banking clans to purchase shares in our western silver mines. I denied their emissaries last week. And in doing so, you became a liability to their profit margins," Genevieve said, picking up a fallen longsword from one of the dead royal guards. She checked its balance with the practiced ease of a veteran killer. "Dominic and the others sold you out. The Rothschilds promised them the North in exchange for the mining rights. This was a corporate hostile takeover, wrapped in a werewolf border dispute." Before Leander could process the sheer scale of the betrayal, the heavy oak doors at the end of the corridor exploded inward. The rival Alpha's lieutenants, A massive pack of heavily armed, furious warriors swarmed into the antechamber. They took one look at the shattered dining hall, their defeated leaders on the floor, and the Alpha King standing beside a tiny, blood-splattered waitress. "Kill them!" a lieutenant roared, drawing a heavy battle-axe. "Tear them to pieces!" "Can you fight?" Genevieve asked, not even turning to look at Leander as she gripped the long sword. Leander let out a low, bone-rattling growl, his eyes flashing a brilliant, terrifying gold. The sound was a promise of absolute carnage. "I am the king of the North, little shadow. I can always fight." The two of them moved as one. It was a breathtaking, horrifying dance of violence. Leander fought with the brute force of a natural disaster, his massive fists and claws shattering armor and breaking bones with every strike. He was the thunder, loud, unstoppable, and devastating. Genevieve was the lightning. She didn't use brute strength. She used her void aura to slip through the chaos undetected, appearing behind heavily armored mercenaries to severe tendons, puncture arteries, and paralyze nervous systems with surgical, terrifying precision. They fought back to back, a terrifying synergy of alpha dominance and omega lethality. When the last mercenary fell, coughing blood onto the floorboards, the tavern was entirely silent, save for the crackling of the hearth. Leander stood panting, covered in the blood of his enemies, while Genevieve elegantly wiped her blade clean on a velvet curtain. "We need to move," Genevieve said, heading toward the kitchen exits. "The Rothschilds will have sent Blackwater trackers to ensure the job was done. This entire valley will be swarming with private military contractors by dawn." Leander didn't argue. For the first time in his reign, the undisputed Alpha King followed the lead of an Omega. The blizzard hit just as they crossed the tree line of the Valerius Valley, a howling whiteout that masked their scent and covered their tracks. Genevieve navigated the treacherous, icy terrain with flawless memory, eventually leading them to a hidden, subterranean cavern system beneath the roots of an ancient ironwood tree. It was an old smuggler's den, stocked with dry firewood, cured meats, and thick furs. Genevieve immediately went to work, striking a flint to ignite a small, smokeless fire in the stone hearth. Leander watched her, his massive frame leaning heavily against the cave wall. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the lingering effects of the silver ash were making his vision blur. But he couldn't take his eyes off her. In the flickering firelight, Genevieve looked utterly exhausted. The black veins of the absorbed poison were still visible under her pale skin. As she reached up to unbind her dark hair, she suddenly swayed, her knees buckling. Leander crossed the cavern in a fraction of a second, catching her before she hit the stone floor. His large, calloused hands enveloped her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. For the first time, he felt the true, fragile reality of her physical form. She was so small, yet she carried the weight of a titan. "You are burning up," Leander said softly, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated against her spine. He gently lowered her onto a pile of thick, bare furs, taking off his heavy velvet cloak to drape it over her shivering body. "The silver," Genevieve whispered, her eyes fluttering shut. "It takes time to process. It burns." The Alpha King, a man who commanded armies and dictated the fate of thousands, knelt on the dirt floor. He carefully lifted her hands, inspecting the blackened veins. Without hesitation, he leaned down and pressed his lips to her wrists. Genevieve gasped, her eyes flying open. "What are you doing?" "An alpha's saliva contains natural coagulants and healing enzymes," Leander murmured, his glowing golden eyes locking onto hers. "You drew the poison from my blood. Let me soothe the burn in yours." It was an incredibly intimate, submissive gesture. Alphas did not heal Omegas. They protected them, claimed them, or ignored them. But to kneel and tend to her wounds was an admission of equality, perhaps even reverence. As Leander's warm breath and gentle kisses trailed over her bruised skin, a sudden electric shockwave rippled through the cavern. Genevieve's breath hitched. The scent of lavender and honey, her true natural omega scent, suddenly flooded the small cave, breaking through her void suppression. It mixed perfectly with the sharp, ozone and pine scent of Leander's alpha aura. Leander froze, his pupils dilating until his eyes were entirely black. The mating bond. It was rare, the stuff of medieval folklore, a biological imperative that instantly linked the souls of two perfectly compatible wolves. "Genevieve," he growled, the name tasting like a prayer on his tongue. She pushed against his chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. "No, you don't understand, Leander. You cannot bond with me." "The fates have already decided," Leander countered, leaning closer, completely intoxicated by her scent. "You are my equal. You are my queen." "I am the weapon your father tried to destroy," Genevieve cried out, the tragic truth finally tearing its way out of her throat. Leander stopped, the romantic haze instantly shattering. "What?" Tears gathered in Genevieve's eyes as she pulled her cloak tighter around herself. "Why do you think the Silver Shadows are a myth, Leander? 300 years ago, my ancestors served the crown. We were the king's secret knives, the ultimate defense against rogue alphas. But your father, King Harrison, he grew paranoid. He realized that a pack of Omegas who could paralyze alphas with a single touch were the only creatures on Earth who could overthrow him." Leander's face went pale. "My father ordered the purge?" "He didn't just order it. He outsourced it," Genevieve spat bitterly. "He paid the House of Rothschild to fund a private extermination squad. Dominic's father and Thorne's uncle led the raid. They slaughtered my entire family in our sleep. I was 5 years old. My mother hid me in a root cellar and engaged her void scent, so they couldn't track my pheromones." Silence heavy as lead filled the cavern. Leander stared at the fire, the foundations of his entire life, his legacy, crumbling into dust. The noble history of his bloodline was built on the slaughtered bodies of innocent Omegas. His father hadn't been a hero. He had been a coward who feared the very people who protected him. "I spent my entire life hiding in plain sight," Genevieve whispered, staring at the embers. "Working in taverns, wiping tables, enduring the insults of arrogant alphas. Waiting for the day Dominic Thorne and the others would gather in one room. Tonight was my revenge. Saving you was just collateral damage." Leander slowly stood up. He didn't look angry. He looked absolutely, terrifyingly resolute. The aura of a true king settled over his shoulders, heavy and dark. He walked over to Genevieve, dropping to one knee before her. He unbuckled his heavy sword belt, drawing the royal broadsword from its scabbard. With a solemn, devastatingly serious expression, he laid the blade flat across her lap and bowed his head, exposing his throat to her. "My father's sins are a debt I cannot repay with words," Leander swore, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "But I offer you this, Genevieve of the Silver Shadows. My life is yours. My crown is yours. If you want the North, I will conquer it for you. If you want vengeance against the House of Rothschild and the corrupt council, I will burn their banks to the ground and paint the snow with their blood." Genevieve looked down at the massive, lethal alpha kneeling before her in the dirt, offering her the world. The trembling, submissive Omega was dead. In her place sat a woman who held the fate of a kingdom in her pale, poison-stained hands. She slowly reached out, her fingers brushing against his jawline. "Get up, Leander," Genevieve commanded softly, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, silver fire. "We have a war to plan." "Are you screaming at that plot twist?" Genevieve wasn't just a random waitress. She was the ultimate weapon betrayed by the very crown she just saved. Now, an unstoppable Alpha King and a lethal Void Omega are teaming up to dismantle a corrupt financial empire. If you want to see them burn the Rothschild syndicate to the ground, like this video, share it, and subscribe to follow their epic revenge.